For the last few years, Zukiworld has been putting together overland-style events that have the goal of meeting the border convergence of 3 states. It's been a few years since we completed our last trip, so it was time for another one over. The goal of this trip was to meet the border convergence of Idaho, Utah, and Nevada. For me, this was a nearly 2,000-mile trip, 6 days of driving, 5 nights of backcountry camping. We got to see ghost towns, cliffs, canyons, rivers, lakes, ponds, mountaintops, and more. It was a truly amazing trip. The vehicle that I chose to take on this trip is my 1996 Suzuki Sidekick Sport. In this vehicle, I've swapped in the J23 engine from a 2006 Suzuki Aereo for some added power. I built a custom front bumper that houses a Viair air compressor and air tanks so I can repair tires and adjust air pressure as needed on the trip. It also holds a worn M8000 winch and auxiliary LED lighting. The axles are equipped with 5 12-to-1 gears, and the rear axle has a Lock-Right differential lock in it. The suspension is custom, and it was put together by Bob Tupper from Creation Fabrication. The front consists of Fox dual-rate coilovers and custom lower control arms. And the rear has custom springs, custom trailing arms and a top link, and custom shocks and mounts. The transfer case has 4 24-to-1 low-range gears and is equipped with twin sticks. The interior of the Sidekick is equipped with a VHF radio for communications with other members of the group, an iPad mini along with a Bluetooth GPS receiver and Gaia GPS software for plotting our track, auxiliary 12-volt power plugs for charging electronics, and an ARB freezer fridge for keeping things cool during the trip. I live near the town of Seaside in northwest Oregon, so that's where the trip began for me. I left early in the morning, and my destination was the town of Sumter in eastern Oregon, where I was to meet up with the other people participating in this trip. The meeting place is a state park where there's a retired dredge that you can tour. It is time for another overland adventure with the Zukiworld crew. I left my house on the North Oregon coast this morning, and I'm headed toward the town of Sumter. It's a small town in the northeast corner of Oregon, just off I-84. And it's a few hundred miles away, about 8 hours of driving, so hopefully we're going to put some pavement and also the rain behind us. It's been a few thousand miles since I put the Aereo 2.3 engine in this Sidekick, and it's been running good, no problems at all. This will be the first long-distance overland-type trip I've taken with it. And I've got the Sidekick pretty heavily loaded with camping gear here, but it sure is nice to set the cruise control in 5th gear and not have to worry about a downshift for every little hill that I come to. We've made it through the traffic mess that was in Portland and headed into the Columbia River Gorge on Interstate 84. And normally this is a very scenic, picturesque drive. Not so much today. The weather sucks. Hopefully we'll leave some of this rain behind us the further east we go. We're at milepost 117 on Interstate 84. So a couple of hours east of Portland. And the weather's cleared up quite a bit. It's awful nice to see the clear blue sky and the sun out here. Some of the wind turbines over there on the Washington side of the Columbia River. It was getting late in the day, so we decided to set up camp at the Union Creek campground at nearby Phillips Lake. We left camp in the morning on day 2 and headed out across the dam at Phillips Lake. Our first point of interest was a lookout at the top of Bald Mountain, where we were able to admire the views and some amateur radio equipment that was set up there. Next up was the site of Malheur City. When we got here, we found a relatively modern building perched on top of a foundation of flat rocks. It had the sign Malheur City Convention Center on it. There was also a very well-maintained cemetery nearby, so we decided to stop here for lunch. While we were eating, a pickup truck pulled up, and a nice gentleman stepped out and identified himself as the groundskeeper for the cemetery. He was also a member of the local historical society and was able to give us some excellent local history. Up next was a quick stop at the Oregon Trail, where you can see the ruts left by wagons on their way to Oregon. And then it was off to the Owyhee Dam. A unique feature of the Owyhee Dam is its large circular-shaped spillway. Unfortunately, the water level was too low for us to watch it working, but I can just imagine the way it must look when it's in operation. Next up was a short scenic drive along the lakeshore, followed by a long, slow, rocky uphill climb away from the lake. Then we descended into the Sucker Creek area and made camp for the night. The next morning we awoke to a bit of a surprise. Eric's right rear tire on his Suzuki Equator was completely flat, sitting on the rim. Fortunately, we all carry a good supply of tire plugs and have onboard air. So one tire plug and a little bit of air later, and we were back on the road.
Oh, it's actually a rock too.
Oh, there's a rock in there?
I can hear it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'll poke it down in the tire, then you can have it, it's like one of those self-balancing beads, right?
Yeah, it's going in.
Why won't it come out?
Now there's a hole. Oh, rocks. Hey, everybody. So this is how you fix a tire in the field. And you put it in the hole. Just like that.
The major point of interest for the next day was the town of Silver City. This is a ghost town where most of the buildings are privately owned and some residents still remain. Some of the businesses are still in operation and you can even rent a room in the local hotel. Unfortunately on this day, town was packed. There was a whole bunch of side-by-sides, four-wheelers, motorcycles, and four-wheel drive vehicles in town, and it was actually difficult to find a place to park. We saw a local sheriff driving through town in his side-by-side and flagged him down. He informed us that town is usually this busy on the weekends, so we hope to come back on a weekday when there isn't quite so many people. Once we were done at Silver City, we put some miles behind us and drove to the Duck Valley Indian Reservation and set up camp at the Mountain View Lake. The next morning we awoke to a visit from the tribal police. He informed us that we should have obtained a camping permit prior to setting up camp the night before. We explained to him that we read all the posted rules and that there was no mention of this, and he said that he understood and just asked us to get a permit on our way out of town. First up for the day was a visit to the Bridge to Nowhere outside the town of Malheur City. After that we stopped briefly at the Wild Horse Dam and then continued on to the town of Jarbidge. Jarbidge is a peaceful little ghost town, nestled in a valley in between some tall mountains. We stayed there for a couple of hours and ate lunch, and really enjoyed our time here. We decided that this is a place we really need to come back and visit and spend some more time. When we left the town of Jarbidge, we experienced some views that made this whole trip worthwhile. The descent from the mountains down into the valleys was nothing short of amazing. There were deep snowdrifts that were melting, and the valleys were covered with green and wildflowers of all color. Every direction you look, there was a panoramic view. Once we left the scenery of Jarbidge in the Copper Valley, we headed to Tabor Creek to set up camp for the night. Well, this was it, the day that we're scheduled to meet our goal, the border convergence of the 3 states. Unfortunately, when we got close to the convergence, we discovered the route that we had chosen was behind a locked gate with a no trespassing sign. So we went up to the house that was next to the gate and knocked on the door. The cattle rancher that came out was friendly, and when we explained what it was that we were doing, he gave us his keys and permission to go through his gates in his property to reach our goal. He simply asked that we didn't spook the cattle and return the keys under a rock on his gas can on our way back out.
Well, 5 days of driving, 4 nights of camping, almost 1,000 miles since I left my house 5 days ago. Got to see some ghost towns, camped at a different spot every night, went swimming in lakes and ponds and rivers and springs. Really got to see some pretty neat country here in the Northwest. And our goal's finally in sight. It'd be kind of hard to see on the screen there, but that waypoint that we're coming up to is our border convergence. And we're almost there.
We spent a few minutes at the corner marker and snapped a few photographs. Once I had completed the obligatory plank on the corner marker pose, we packed up and headed back toward home. Another extraordinary adventure in the books.